el país afirma que Luma es como que lo peor que nos ha pasado en la historia de la humanidad. Los gobernadores, todos los candidatos decían que Luma se tiene que ir. ¿Cuál es la posición de la Junta? ¿Luma se tiene que ir?
No. Bueno, buenas noches, Jay, primero. It's more complicated than just getting rid of the operator. Now, Luma has a difficult job, but the challenge is that the energy system that Puerto Rico faced predate Luma. It was before Luma. It goes back to when PREPA owned the system. You have a system that has not been maintained for decades. You have a system that is failing. Luma is operating that failing system. You also have shortages in generation, on the generation side. When the power goes out, doesn't go on, but people blame Luma.
But the board, la Junta, ¿quiere que Luma se vaya o que se quede?
Yeah. I'm going to leave. The governor right now, right, is in discussions with the operator, and she's made statements. What we're saying right now is we just need, if they want to change operators, you just need to have a viable plan, right? There's not a political solution to this problem. So if they think that Luma's not performing, then you need a viable alternative to that.
¿Como cuál pudiera ser una alternativa viable a la permanencia de Luma?
You could have an alternative operator, right? What you can't have is go back to the system that didn't work before, right? And you know, for decades, when PREPA operated the system was failing, the system wasn't invested in, it was politicized. You don't want to go back to that. And people sometimes have short memories. You don't remember why, right? It was really important to privatize it. So that's kind of where we are.
O sea que regresar a la propuesta de que sea pública no es opción. Regresar a la Autoridad de Energía Eléctrica no es opción. Sería un operador privado distinto a Luma. Esa es la posición de la Junta.
Yeah. Luma needs to be held accountable, right? Responsible and accountable. And they also need to be given the resources necessary, but they need to be held accountable. If they can't be, and the government doesn't feel comfortable with them, then they need to provide an alternative. But the alternative needs to be someone that has incentives, is accountable, but going back to a politicized system that was run by politicians did not work.
O sea que la alternativa de que sea pública no es opción. Esa es la respuesta concreta.
We do not want to go back to the failed system of the past.
Ok. Y entonces la decisión es de la Junta o es de la gobernadora.
The governor hasn't proposed a plan. In the end, the board would have to review it and see, is it consistent with the fiscal plan, right? But right now, the law, Act 17 says, right now, it says that the operators of the systems have to be private. That is currently in Act 17. The governor has proposed changes to Act 17, but that provision has not changed. So what we looked for is it consistent with the fiscal plan? Is it consistent with the law?
La ley decía que teníamos que movernos a energía renovable. No importó que la ley dijera eso. Vamos a movernos a más gas natural. La posición de la Junta sobre eso favorece que nos sigamos moviendo a más alternativas de gas natural en vez de movernos a energía renovable como se había comprometido el país a hacer.
Yeah, it's a great question. Right now, the governor's proposal, right, is to eliminate the renewable targets, the intermediate renewable targets, and only have one at the end. We think it's important to have diversified fuels for Puerto Rico, not rely on any one fuel. Energy independence is important for Puerto Rico, and renewables can provide energy independence, right? Notwithstanding whether or not you're getting fuel from another place by boat, you have the ability to generate your own fuel. There's a value to that in the system. That being said, we have a shortage of generation. So I think it's not one or the other, right? It is both. And even in the governor's proposal, she leaves in the renewable targets for 2050. We just need to make sure that we're slowly moving towards renewables and we're not forgetting about it, so that when 2050 comes, right, we didn't do any renewables. Because renewables are part of the future for Puerto Rico.
Cuando la ley decía que teníamos que llegar a 40%, no lo hicimos, vamos a hacerlo ahora para que el 2050 tal vez lleguemos al 100%. Usted sabe que yo no puedo rebajar
Yeah.
100 libras si no rebajé antes 20, si no rebajé antes 50, si no rebajé antes 75 y llegar a 100. Si quito las metas de 20, 50 y 70, no voy a llegar nunca a las 100.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point that has to be made to the legislature. You need to have probably intermediate goals if you are actually
Sí,
going
pero
to
la
get to
posición
them.
de la Junta,
Yeah.
la posición de la Junta es, porque yo sé, obviamente la legislatura decide si enmienda la ley, pero la posición de la Junta es favorecer que sigamos trayendo más combustible fósil o movernos a energía renovable. ¿Cuál de las dos posiciones? Porque la Junta puede básicamente plantear en el plan fiscal que lo sostenible para Puerto Rico sea otra alternativa.
What we have been guided for in the past is in what's in the fiscal plan, and within the fiscal plan has been guided for what is in Act 17. So we actually don't come up with our own conclusion. We've actually followed what the legislature said. So regarding to Act 17, we were in favor of renewables because Act 17 said to be in favor of renewables, and we said, fine, whatever that costs. If that changes, we're going to change. But that's all, it hasn't changed yet, right? There's a proposal. The legislature has to decide. But I think your points are important. I think it's important for the legislature to decide, do we want a path to renewables or do we not?
De acuerdo. El asunto es que si la Junta tiene un plan fiscal y establece pues, los costos y establece las inversiones en gran medida dentro de un marco de acción.
Yeah.
Y si la Junta y la gobernadora van hacia el tema de energía de gas natural, pues no vamos a ir hacia renovable. O sea, los recursos no dan para las dos cosas, es either or, o sea, o lo hacemos uno o hacia otro lado. Y de ahí mi pregunta, y perdone que insista, en que siento que no hay una respuesta concreta de cuál es la posición de la Junta con este movimiento de olvidarnos de las metas por el momento renovables e irnos a gas natural.
Sure. The costs are important to the board. So I can tell you that. What the board doesn't want to do is increase costs for the people of Puerto Rico. So it's not at any cost. And in the past, there are some renewable projects that the board has not approved, notwithstanding the law to get there because the costs were too high. And we didn't want to lock in the highest costs for the next 25 years. So that being said, what we're going to look at is what is the plan? And again, I've said this, I'll say my personal opinion is energy independence for Puerto Rico has a value, and that means solar and renewables. But it can't be at any cost, right? There's a cost to batteries, there's a cost to it. And it can't be at the cost that's higher than anyone else is paying for renewables. And we want to make sure that we make progress towards renewables, have interim points to do that, because your point is you'll never get there if you don't have interim points. But it has to be at affordable rates. Because the number one thing I think for people in Puerto Rico right now is a reliable system and that it's an affordable system. And I think energy independence is part of that. And that's where renewables have to be part of that equation. It shouldn't be one or the other.
Ok, entonces no hay una objeción de la Junta de la posición de la gobernadora de movernos más hacia gas natural y dejar para posteriormente la energía renovable.
Yeah.
No, la Junta no objeta el plan de la gobernadora de movernos más hacia gas natural.
What I've seen so far, and we haven't seen the whole plan, right, is the desire, we need to renew some generation assets that are currently failing. And what is faster to build reliability, right, one or the other? So we're not objecting to LNG. We're not objecting to having new LNG, but it also shouldn't occupy the space for the others. We need a lot of generation, right? We need way more generation than Puerto Rico has today. And that should be a mix of LNG assets or whatever the governor is asking for, and also renewables. And I think the governor recognizes that because both is in her bill. The legislature needs to make sure that the law gives targets so that we can do both.
Las plantas de gas natural y de hidrógeno verde van a tardar 5, 7, quizás 10 años. La energía renovable puede estar lista en mucho menos tiempo. Toma tiempo las baterías Power Pack, porque obviamente no son baterías de casa, son mega baterías hechas custom made. Pero no sería más rápido el sistema renovable.
Yeah. I don't know the exact dates, but that's why I'm saying we should not abandon the renewables. And having a 2050
Sí, pero
target.
es que si ustedes en la Junta no presionan ese cambio, hay evidentemente otros grupos que están presionando en otra dirección, porque es obvio. Entonces, si la Junta no tiene la premura en los procesos, pues, bueno, yo creo que ustedes todos sabemos lo que va a pasar.
Well, I think we have, right? So the record shows for it. And I think the head of PREB recently publicly said, well, we may not have made the renewable targets right now. What's in the pipeline today gets you to 20 to 30% renewables. So we may not have gotten there, but within 2 years, according to the current plans, according to PREB, we're 20 to 30% there. So we've been approving those projects, right? So we will continue to approve those projects. And that's why I think it's important to have some intermediate goals. Because if you have those intermediate goals, we will approve those projects. And it is important to have that. So it is one of the things of the board, but we do have to listen to what the legislature says, and I think that's important.
Sí, y el negociado de energía, de nuevo, yo de acuerdo en que hacía falta esa entidad fiscalizadora en el medio. La cosa es que, pues, si no tiene la fuerza para obligar con multas de verdad, pues evidentemente no le hacemos caso, como pasó con la pasada ley, que teníamos una ley del 2019, la ley 17, un plan integrado de recursos de 2021, que decía, vamos a movernos hacia renovables, vamos a hacer una planta en Bayamón que finalmente va a ser en San Juan, etcétera, y realmente pues el plan decía, vamos a decomisar Aguirre, vamos a decomisar partes de Palo Seco, gran parte de Costa Sur, nada de eso ocurrió. De ahí mi punto de que si ustedes, o sea, la experiencia nos dice que si no lo obligan, no van a cambiar. Y de ahí mis preguntas, ¿por qué insisto en las preguntas de cuál es la posición de la Junta? Porque ya con el negociado de energía, con la ley aprobada, con el plan integrado de recursos aprobado, nada de lo que se dijo que se iba a hacer se hizo en los pasados 5 años.
Yeah, let me be very clear. We think renewables need to be part of the solution, and we will push for that. When we started getting involved in the energy, the government was doing this. We wanted to see, there's no execution. Why are projects not approved? We approved renewable projects 3-4 years ago that still are not turned on today. And that question is, why is it not approved? So we brought everyone in the room, PREPA, LUMA, everyone. This needs to happen. So it's one thing to approve projects. It's another thing to get them turned on. That is why also this year we're focused on execution is everything. We have $17 billion in federal dollars set aside for Puerto Rico. Only 3.5 billion of that is spent. 17 billion and only 3.5 is spent. That's all part of rebuilding the system. And we need to rebuild it with renewables and anything else that happens. But your point, it needs to happen fast because people are tired.
Llegó el momento de pagar la deuda de energía eléctrica. La jueza Laura Taylor Swain evidentemente tiene en su escritorio la decisión de empujar este asunto ya para este año. Es bastante obvio que pidió hacer un plan fiscal pronto y que simultáneamente está pidiendo moverse para finalizar esto, incluso amenazando con la posibilidad de poner un receiver y subir los precios a como quiera. ¿Qué va a hacer la Junta? ¿Qué nos dice el plan fiscal de la Junta que finalmente se supone que aprueben en estos días? Porque la jueza así lo establece.
Yeah. We have a plan that we filed with the court that reduces the debt 80%, right? The bondholders are asking for $8.5 billion plus interest, almost 10, 11, $12 billion. That would increase rates to levels that are unaffordable. 7, 8 cents on top of what you're paying now before you even invest in the system. So what we're saying is that has to go down by 80%. The number is $2.6 billion. When we go back and look at the system and how much what it's investing in the system, we know that for decades, it has been underinvesting in the system. I went back and looked at...
Okay, perdóname, los bonistas están pidiendo 12 billones. Lo más que ustedes están dispuestos a pagar son 2.6 billones.
That's right.
Ese es el número.
That's 2.6.
Sin embargo, la gobernadora acaba de contratar, a través de Francisco Domínguez en la FAF, a Houlihan, que es una entidad financiera que había negociado para obligar y que se aumentara el costo de energía eléctrica para pagarle a los bonistas. ¿Cómo le parece a ustedes eso? Que cambiaran a Ancura y pongan ahora a Houlihan a negociar esto en la FAF.
Yeah. I mean, this is a professional firm. I think the governor's entitled to have or hire whatever advisors, right, they think will help them understand the issue. I think when they understand the issue, they'll come to the same conclusion as we have, which is people of Puerto Rico can't really afford to pay much more. So their advisors probably come to the same conclusions as advisors. So I leave up to them who they're hiring to handle any perceived conflicts, right? That's not for us to decide.
Pero no es levanta una bandera que una entidad sea contratada que antes fue cabildera de los bonistas o buscó los intereses de los bonistas, que sea ahora contratada para manejar los intereses de Puerto Rico.
Yeah, I'm going to assume that they hired them because they have experience and knowledge in the space, and that when you see the numbers, it is very clear. Rates in Puerto Rico are too high. You can't afford to add on more money and fund the system the way the system needs to be funded. You know, between 1989 and 2017, the rates were never changed and the system wasn't funded, and we know that the system was deteriorating. Again, between 2017 and now, no rate change to the base, system continues to deteriorate. And we know what happened on New Year's Eve. We all know, we lived it, right? But it wasn't, New Year's Eve was the culmination of a year, right, of events where there were load shed events, there were outages, people are tired. We need to have an honest conversation about what is the state of the system, how much does the system need to be invested. PREB will make the determination, but they need to do it with all of the information. And this fiscal plan shows all the information. A bottoms-up budget, this is what the system may need, right, in order to fully fund the system. Now, that may not be a number that people feel comfortable funding. That's up to PREB to make that decision. But we should all just do it with eyes open, right? Are we meeting all the needs of the system? What are the requirements? What does the system cost? That's the most important thing.
Ok, ¿cuánto sería entonces el aumento de la factura en un pago de 2.6 billones de dólares, que es lo que ustedes están planteando?
Yeah. In the plan that we had last year, we have a new plan now. Last year's plan, that number would have been about 1.5 cents. Okay? What we're actually saying now is when you look at the state of the system and what the needs of the system are, that 1.5 cents needs to go back into the system. We need to invest more in the system, which means that there isn't room to add on top of the rates additional money for the creditors. Well, how are you going to get out of it? Well, we'll have to figure out how to pay them the 2.6, because we're committed to exiting Title III. We're committed to finding the money for the 2.6, but we think it's hard to increase the rates to fully fund the system to what the system needs and also add on top of that the debt. If you look at what the bondholders are asking for, they're asking for 7 to 8 cents in additional on top of the rate, 7 to 8 cents. When you add pensions to that, it's up to another 2 cents. So what they're asking for is up to 10 cents to pay the creditors on top of what the people are paying right now. And what we're saying is we can only afford to pay the 2.6 that we said we would pay. We may have to find other ways to pay it, which may not be on the rate, but that is still the maximum amount that the people could pay. It's the same people paying.
¿De dónde podría salir entonces? ¿Hay un fondo de emergencia, un fondo de algún tipo de, no sé, de fondo de emergencia, de estabilización o algo por el estilo donde pueda salir esa cantidad de dinero?
Yeah. There's always going to be choices, difficult choices to make. And we're going to work with the government to identify, right, where do we think we can do this? The rates are the toughest one, and we want to make sure that the rates go into the system to repair the system that is failing.
Okay, pero la posición de la Junta es que no se puede aumentar la factura de energía eléctrica para pagar las pensiones ni la deuda de energía eléctrica.
Rates need to go up to fund the system. There's not room in that rate to be affordable for Puerto Rico to add on top of that additional rate to fund it. So we're saying we're going to have to, it would be better to find another source to fund it rather than increase the rates to fund the 2.6 billion.
O sea que la posición oficial de la Junta es que no suba la tarifa para pagar la deuda y pensiones, sino que si va a subir la tarifa sea para invertir en arreglar el sistema. Eso implica que entonces habría que buscar otra fuente de pago para pagar esos 2.6 billones de dólares, que lo que implicaría pagar la deuda de energía eléctrica. No los 12 billones que están pidiendo los bonistas, los 2.6 que la Junta dice que es lo más que Puerto Rico pudiera pagar.
Yeah.
Ese fondo pudiera ser de un fondo de equiparación, un fondo, un impuesto adicional, hay algo en almacenamiento de alguna cuenta del gobierno que pueda hacer, porque básicamente los de COFINA y GO ya se usaron.
Yeah. There are funds that are committed to other things, right? They're expected that these monies are going to be used for other things. It'd be a tough choice to say, we may not be able to fund this thing because this thing is more important. It is a value. It's very important to get out of bankruptcy, right? There's a value to the people of Puerto Rico to exiting Title III so that we can move on and get out of the bankruptcy. So we want to get out. That's why we think it's important to still honor the commitments that we have. And to be clear, we have agreements with 44% of all the creditors. So we're going to find the resources, like you said, where, yeah, there's committed resources to various things. We want to sit down with the governor and say, where do we think, right, we could do this with the least amount of pain? Because there would be pain either way if you add it to the rates.
Eso sería, por ejemplo, la crudita que en vez de ir al Fondo General que se hizo clawback, pues pasarla a pagar de la deuda de energía eléctrica o,
Yeah.
por ejemplo, los impuestos a los vehículos de motor.
Yeah. And we're not suggesting that you should raise any other tax.
No, mi punto es redirigirlo.
Because it's the same thing. And we're not, those funds are committed to other things. So those revenues are committed to other things. We're talking about what dollars maybe we already have that is for an expenditure that was already, they said we were going to do. Maybe we revisit that expenditure and we redirect those resources to this because this is a priority over that. At that level.
So, en el plan fiscal que va la Junta a aprobar, no hay entonces un aumento para pagar la deuda, sino sí podría haber un aumento para reinvertir en arreglar el sistema eléctrico.
That's right. And with the system and
¿De cuánto sería el aumento?
So that's where I was going to just clarify one point. We don't determine what the rates are. All that the plan says is these are all the system requirements if you were to fund what the operators and the system operators say they would need over the next 30 years. And then the evaluation that we make is there money left over to pay the debt? And what the fiscal plan says is when you take into account all of what the system needs, there isn't money left over to pay the debt. But we're not telling PREB what they should raise the rates are. That's something that they need to consider, and they're doing that now. Right now, they're having is what's called a rate case, and they're asking for the same information we asked. What do you need to fund the system? The difference right now is no one has asked that question since 2017. Since 2017, no one has asked what you need. So the budgets were just basically said, you're constrained by the 2017 rate order. Doesn't matter what the system needs. And one more point, in 2017, when the rate was changed, what was said was, we know this is not enough. This is PREB and the government saying this. We know that this rate is not enough to fix the system, but it would be too much for the people of Puerto Rico to raise rates to make up for decades of lack of investment. So we're only going to partially do it. It was envisioned that they would address it later, and then they didn't, and now we're here in 2025. So we're saying what you're saying is there's no room in the rate to fund anything at all. We need to take anything that's available in the rate, decided by PREB, to fund the system. However, we got to find the 2.6 so we can get out of Title III.
Ok, hay un temor de que Donald Trump en un post de Truth Social diga, le congelo los fondos a Puerto Rico que no han sabido usar en los pasados 8 años.
I have not heard that any of the emergency funds are something that people are looking at, right? I think those are the last resorts on the emergency funds. You know, I think they're looking at everything, but I have not heard that emergency funds are on the table. That being said, we should not have, of the 17 billion, only spent 3.5, right? So we're going to need to demonstrate that we need these funds, and us, the governor, and everyone, right, will make the case that these funds are important to fix the system in Puerto Rico. This is not extra, and the fact that it hasn't been spent is not because Puerto Rico doesn't need the money. A lot of things happened in between that, right? We had COVID, we had earthquakes, we had other hurricanes, right, that slowed that down, but there's no excuses anymore. We have to execute, get that money out the door. Though there's always a risk, right, of those funds being taken away, but we're focused like a laser to make sure it gets spent.
¿Se han tenido reuniones en Washington o en otros lugares para precisamente buscar con contactos, evitar que Donald Trump diga, dame esos chavos para atrás.
Yeah. I was in Washington last week. My conversations are only making the case Puerto Rico needs these funds. This is what we're doing. This is everything that we are doing to expedite them. They are not that because we don't need them. You know, I'm a former budget director, so I get it when budget director comes in and wants to look at everything that hasn't been spent. It's a normal thing for a budget director to do. And then people make the case and say, yeah, you might see that money there, but it goes to this, this, and this, and we need it. So as you know, as a former budget director, that's the case I made. You might see this money there, whoever is looking at it, but Puerto Rico needs this money to fix this grid.
Que sí se está hablando. Se ha logrado hablar con Boat, o Boyd, el jefe de OMB.
I have not had any conversations with the executive branch regarding this.
No. So, hemos ido al Congreso, pero no a la Casa Blanca.
I have not talked to the exactly.
¿Y cuándo vamos a ir a la Casa Blanca y evitar que Donald Trump diga el Impoundment Act, yo no creo en él, voy a coger el dinero y gastarlo en otra cosa?
Yeah. We will, or I want to coordinate with the governor. I know the governor's having her conversations. I think the fiscal plan coming out, which shows how critical those funds are to the system and how critical it's not just the electrical system. Electrical system is critical for economic development and the future of the country. So it's critical to have that. So once everything gets, organized, we'll have those conversations. But I think we are 100% united that these funds are super important for Puerto Rico. And if they don't, right, it would impact us.
Es una preocupación de la Junta. Esa se discute en la Junta de Control Fiscal que usted dirige este tema continuamente, el tema de que Donald Trump puede pedir los fondos de vuelta.
Yeah. Again, former budget director, I'm always looking at what risks are, but we always do that, right? There's always a possibility that there's a recession, right? There's always a possibility that another hurricane happens. There's always a possibility that all these happen. So this is just one of all of these risks that we have to. I can tell you that no one has said that these emergency funds are at risk at this point. So we are monitoring it. Our main objective is we have $17 billion set aside. Let's get that money spent. So not give anybody a reason to think that we don't need the funds.
Las tarifas de Donald Trump que van a entrar en vigor van a afectar los planes fiscales, entre ellas 25% a los aceros, aluminio, que afecta directamente la reconstrucción eléctrica de Puerto Rico. Sabemos que el sistema corre en metales. ¿Eso lo han tomado en consideración?
We have not looked at the impacts of any of those things, right? I mean, there's a lot of things that are speculative, and we're trying to base things on the information that we have right now, not speculation. So we have not considered that.
Es probable que tengan que tomar en consideración, particularmente la de 25% de tarifas de aluminio y metales que ya han entrado. O sea, que ya es básicamente un hecho. ¿Cómo trabajamos eso? ¿Cómo se trabaja cuando ustedes se sientan a hacer un plan? El hecho de que el presidente, con una orden ejecutiva, mañana cambia todo el plan, por ejemplo, a través de un impuesto de arancel como este. ¿Cómo ustedes pueden trabajar para pronosticar el costo de una obra de construcción que está llena de metales como una planta eléctrica?
Yeah. So you can't plan for unknowns. What you can do is plan based on the information that you have, right? No one thought that inflation, right, was going to happen at the level of it did, and then it would come down as fast as it did. No one thought that interest rates were going to go up as high as they did, and then they came down, right, just as fast. So the tariff situation is a much bigger conversation, much bigger than the impact on Puerto Rico. There are other sources, right, of metals. So I don't want to speculate on what that is. It's much bigger than what happens here, and we'll go for, once we have more information, we'll see if it really impacts, we'd make adjustments, but we're not there yet.
¿Puede hacerme un resumen de qué cosas importantes tiene el plan fiscal?
The most important thing that's in the plan is that the priority needs to be funding the system to make sure that the system is maintained and operated, right? All necessary maintenance expenses are fully funded prior to paying any debt. That is the big difference in this plan. And it's not a difference, it was always that. But what this plan actually says is that we now know that expenses are more than revenues, and there is no net revenues. There is nothing left to pay the debt. And that's probably the biggest change that people will care about. The plan also assumes Act 17 compliance, right? Now we know that Act 17 is going to change. So we may have to make a change after the fact to reflect it. However, we already looked at if Act 17 changes and all of the governor's proposals go through, would that change the conclusion of the plan? And we determined that it does not. So therefore, we're still in the same place. Not enough money to pay any debt, but we need to fulfill the commitments that we made so that we can get out of bankruptcy. So we need to find the 2.6 billion. Those are the most important parts of the plan.
¿Se ha reunido con Jenniffer González?
Yes.
Y en esas conversaciones, ¿ha habido diferencias, acuerdos? ¿Qué cosas están de acuerdo y qué cosas están en desacuerdo?
I think we have similar, she wants the best for Puerto Rico. She would like the board to go away, right? She wants us to end. I do too, right? So
El Centro de Periodismo Investigativo dice que no, que la Junta quiere quedarse.
Yeah, it does. And in that story, we talked about 4 consecutive balanced budgets, which we'd like to get. And there's other things in that story where I don't know that anyone would find offensive. We want Puerto Rico to have an accounting system, so you actually know how much money you spend. We want Puerto Rico to be able to know and track their federal dollars and know how much the agencies are spending and how much you need, right? We want Puerto Rico to have a capital plan, so you actually know, right, where do we need to spend our resources over the long time. Those 3 things are all reasons why Puerto Rico went bankrupt, right? So what we're saying is, while we're getting the 4 consecutive balanced budgets, which the governor and I talked about getting those, right? She wants to get 4 consecutive balanced budgets. So while we do that, let's do those other things, right? No one should be offended at wanting to get an accounting system, wanting to be able to track federal funds, wanting to have a budget system that actually works, wanting to have long-term plans. And this is not just something that, we came up with. Every state does this, has these things. Now, I spent 7 years as budget director. These are basic things. And you know who else is looking for these things? The financial markets. If you want to re-enter the financial markets, they want to know that you know how much is spent. They got burned when Puerto Rico was still issuing debt in 2014, and in 2015 they said they couldn't pay the debt because they were listening to the information that they were told, right? They want to know now. They have an accounting system that tells us. Part of the reason they didn't know is because Puerto Rico wasn't doing audited financial statements. So the audited financial statements were 3 years behind. So if you would have been up to date, they would have known that you didn't have the money to issue more debt. Those are the things that we're talking about. We want to leave and get 4 consecutive balanced budgets, but we also want to know that what happened in 2016 doesn't happen again. And to just everyone in Puerto Rico, including the government, should want to have those tools in place so that they can go back and say, we have all of this information, we can do this responsibly. The lessons were learned.
Mujica, la pregunta, para mí esto es una pregunta muy difícil porque pues, hay un statement detrás de ella. Yo creo que la Universidad de Puerto Rico tiene que cambiar dramáticamente y creo que deberíamos tener el presupuesto que tiene actualmente para atraer talento de Caltech, de MIT, para poder convertirla en un Research and Development Institution, no un Education o un Teaching Institution. Para eso tenemos ya las privadas. Y el país necesita cosas bien específicas, médicos, ingeniería, AI, inteligencia artificial, o sea, todas esas cosas que están rompiendo los esquemas, oficios. So, ¿ha planteado la Junta ese cambio? La Junta ha planteado el cambio de convertir la Universidad de Puerto Rico en un Research y Development Institution que probablemente signifique dejar solamente Río Piedras, Mayagüez y Ciencias Médicas, los demás recintos, pues que pasen a la empresa privada para convertirla en un lugar que pueda realmente con $500 millones que tendría de presupuesto atraer talentos de otras universidades para que vengan aquí y monten laboratorios y se conviertan en un centro de desarrollo económico.
Yeah. We haven't said it the way you're saying it, but what we have said is we are willing to invest more in the university. It is an important part of the economic engine for Puerto Rico. It was, right, a shining star at one point, and because of various reasons, right, people haven't adjusted to current times. We need to invest in AI. We produce great engineers that people come from all over the world and take them and they leave Puerto Rico. We can do more research here. Recognize that times have changed. The university needs to change with those times, while also supporting. I'm a product of public university system while supporting students because it's the only avenue they have, right, for social mobility. So we've allocated an additional $100 million for the university the year before last, another $100 million last year. This year's budget, we'll look at how much we allocate. Of that amount, we've only spent 50, which is just to deal with deficits and non-teaching staff. Those were the priorities of the administration, right? I know there's going to be a change in administration now. What we're saying here is those things that you talked about, let's invest in those. Let's figure out how to get students from other places to come here. All of these things we've actually said. We didn't say, what are you going to do with the campuses? But you say you have to recognize the fact that you have 35% less students, probably going to go up even more, 40% less students. That's a reality that you have to face. What the institution will say is, just put our budget back to where it was. We won't change anything. We'll kick the can down the road. And then you're not doing anything. So what we're saying is, I spent 9 months with the head of the university, the head of the board, DDEC, the head of AFAF, all of us in a room. OHEPE's in the room, all of us in a room for 9 months trying to work on what are things that we could do to change the system. And after that, we said we're going to put money up. And then nothing changed. They didn't do any of the things, right? They will say, well, the board wants to force us to do these things. We shouldn't have to force them to do them. They should want to do these things, right? Change is tough. Change is hard. People don't want to do something a little bit different. But let's invest in the teachers, right? Instead of investing, let's invest in the classroom. Let's put more money in the classroom. Maybe it means that, right, there's fewer resources in other places that students aren't using. Students are voting with their feet, right? They're going to other universities. They're going to other private universities. It shouldn't be that way. The best system should be UPR. That should be the system where everyone's going through and the private universities are taking the other. I'm not against the private universities. Mm-hmm. But if people are not satisfied with what's happening here, they're going to go to somewhere else. And they're taking, and they're paying more to go to those other institutions.
Es que mi problema con ese argumento es que, por ejemplo, tenemos un montón de médicos, tenemos un montón de ingenieros que el día después de la graduación ya se han ido de Puerto Rico. Yeah. Eso pues de nada nos sirve porque yo no veo a Microsoft entrenándole los ingenieros a Apple. Puerto Rico no puede entrenar los ingenieros a Texas, right, o los médicos a Florida o a Pensilvania. So, ¿qué condiciones deberíamos crear para lograr que esa inversión en ese estudiante tenga un rendimiento?
Right. All right, we're going to be educating the people so that then they can go leave Puerto Rico. And so you need the other part, which is the economic development part. And actually, part of the 9 months, that's why we had DDEC in the room, the chamber was in the room, we had other people in the room to unite these. If we're going to educate world-class students, we want them to stay in Puerto Rico, you need to have the jobs here, right? And the jobs are not in tourism, right? Not the jobs that we're talking about, right? You want to have that growth.
Sí, so pero en el caso de ingenieros no, pero en el caso de médicos sí hay una demanda enorme. Ahora mismo, hay para ingenieros también, dependiendo de qué disciplina, pero para médicos hay una demanda brutal y se siguen yendo, obviamente, porque las condiciones son mejores fuera. Y el argumento podríamos tenerlo aquí ahora 25,000 veces, pero si yo no tengo deuda estudiantil porque el Estado me la subsidió, si yo estos fondos los tengo precisamente para poder ayudarte cuando tú estás empezando, para que después al final tú me devuelvas como país, en este caso como institución, pues tiene sentido el que Ciencias Médicas, por ejemplo, diga, bueno, pues yo te voy a subsidiar toda tu educación a cambio de que tú te quedes en Puerto Rico aquí cantidad de años.
Yeah. All of UPR is not the same. They're different, right? The fact that the accreditation with regard to neuroscience is turned around, that's great news. Let's add funding for residencies. And I think the government, the new health commissioner, they all want to do those things. We'll fund those, right? Let's add the residencies so we have more people learning specialties, the ones that are needed in Puerto Rico. Part of the issue is, right, there's a mismatch between the doctors we have and the specialties that we need. But let's fund those. And then let's also create incentives for people to stay here, right? Not incentives for everyone where you don't really change anything, right? Everyone gets a reduction in their tax rates, but you haven't really brought more doctors. You just lowered the cost of staying here. We want doctors to stay here, but we also want people to come here. So there are programs that you can do if you want to do this. Increasing by hundreds the amount of residencies in local hospitals. And I think what UPR did, right, part of that is if UPR doesn't have the residencies, we'll go to private hospitals, right, and have the residencies. That's a great idea. We should fund that. And let's do more of those creative things. And that requires like thinking outside the box, but we can do those things. And we're all supportive of that. And that's also a reason I think we need to have, the budget needs to be responsible, and we need to have resources available. Because if we deplete what the Commonwealth budget has, we can't make these investments. And we worked really hard to control the budget and control spending so that we have money left over, so that now we could invest in the things that work.
Así que darle incentivos de, por ejemplo, el 4% a los médicos adicional no sería una opción, sino con las especialidades que se identifiquen que hay necesidad.
It should be more targeted. It should be targeted to what Puerto Rico needs.
So, hay una apertura de la Junta para darlo, este incentivo a que médicos se queden, pero solo en las disciplinas que le hagan una falta especial al país.
We approved one last year specifically for neuroscientists, for neurosurgeons, I remember, and we only got a couple, right, as a result of that. So the point is, we will do targeted things if we think it actually is going to move the needle, not just because, right, somebody knows someone who's doctors, we think we can do this, and then nothing has changed. But if we know that this is going to result in a change actually happening, and there's data behind that, then that's something that we would be open to.
¿Han pensado quitar algunos de los que ya se han puesto, siendo que estamos en un proceso de quiebra, se puede revisar muchas de las cosas del pasado? A médicos que, por ejemplo, tienen una estética en vez de medicina, pero asumen un 4% de impuestos porque supuestamente van a practicar medicina, cuando realmente están practicando más estética.
Yeah. We're not talking about raising taxes on people, right? That doesn't really help either, particularly when you have a shortage. But we need to be thoughtful about anything new that we're due. And we're positioned right now in a good place in the sense that, like, you know, there are risks, as I mentioned earlier, right? There are things out there that are unknown.
Sí, pero por ejemplo, le voy a dar un ejemplo concreto. Yo llamo a un médico, no tiene tiempo para atenderme por una condición médica, pero le llamo para que me ponga Botox, mañana mismo tiene tiempo en mi cita. Entonces, y tengo un 4% de incentivo, y Dios lo bendiga, yo quisiera también tener 4% de incentivo, ¿no? Y no pagar casi impuestos. Pero francamente, para eso no fue que se te dio el 4%, se fue para practicar medicina, no para que te fueras a ponerme fillers.
That's exactly what we're saying. So as we go forward, what do we need? Who are the physicians we need? And then how can we get them both to stay here? And how can we get them to come here? And how do we create incentives just for them? Whether I go back and take it away, that's a very different thing that we have not talked about.
Lo descarta.
I'm not interested necessarily in, the implications of that are different, right? You're punishing people for something that has been done. There's also, Puerto Rico has this strange tax code where, you know, you give people benefits that last forever in a contract, right? So there's that issue, right? That's a very unique.
Eso solo CPA lo pueden explicar.
Yeah.
Gracias, director. Gracias.
Gracias a ti.
Si llegaste hasta aquí, tú eres parte de la resistencia. Ahora suscríbete. Casi 40 de cada 100 no se suscriben y piensan que están suscritos. Dale subscribe al canal y la campanita. Nos ayudas un montón cuando te suscribes porque hace que el algoritmo empiece a enviarle a otras personas como tú. So, suscríbete aquí en mi canal de YouTube, JFonsecaPR.